There's something about a man standing alone on failing land that tells you everything about the human condition. Pride, stubbornness, the terrible weight of inheritance. This is a story about Jacob Turner, a rancher in southeastern Arizona territory who thought he knew dirt until a stranger from Philadelphia taught him the difference between working land and understanding it. It's about second chances that arrive on a stagecoach, about wisdom that comes wrapped in calico, and about learning that asking for help isn't surrender, it's survival. In the spring of 1883, when the desert was dry and a man's prospects were drier still, Jacob Turner made a decision that would save more than his ranch. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they don't have all the answers. This is one of those times. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago. Jacob knew because he'd watched the steam stop rising, watched the surface film over with a dull sheen that caught lamplight like oil on water. The tin cup sat on the kitchen table next to the third letter, if he was counting. And he was, because a man down to 17 head of cattle on 50 acres counted everything. My father taught soil chemistry at the agricultural college before consumption took him. Jacob read the line again. His thumb left a smudge on the paper. The woman wrote in a clear hand. Each letter formed precise as fence posts. Nothing fancy, just facts laid out straight. I know crop rotation, composting, and how to read land. The words sat there like an accusation. He'd been ranching this land for 14 years, and he'd never heard those things put together that way. Dirt was dirt. You ran cattle on it, watched grass grow or not grow. And that was the whole business. I'm 38. No illusions about romance. But I can work. He set the letter down, picked up his coffee cup. The liquid was cold enough to taste bitter. Like it had been sitting since yesterday. Maybe it had. Time ran strange when you couldn't sleep. The lamp on the table needed its chimney cleaned. Soot darkened the glass, made the flame look sick and yellow. He kept meaning to tend to it, kept meaning to do a lot of things. This morning, or was it yesterday morning, he'd walked the north pasture before dawn. That's what he did now when sleep wouldn't come. Walked land his father had worked 23 years without breaking it. The soil had come away gray in his hands. Not brown, not the rich, dark earth his father used to run through his fingers with that satisfied nod. Gray, like ash, like something already burned. 17 head. He'd counted them twice in the weak light, hoping he'd missed some in the shadows. He hadn't. His father's voice. You're killing my land, boy. That had been 2 years ago, maybe a week before the old man died. They'd stood in this same kitchen. His father had looked at him with eyes that held more disappointment than anger. Which was worse. And Jacob had defended himself, listed everything he'd done, used every acre, maximized every field, pushed for yield like the agriculture journals said to do. You're mining it, his father had said. Voice quiet. Final. Like silver. One day there won't be anything left. Jacob picked up the letter again. The paper was good quality, not the cheap stuff. This woman, Emily Carter. The signature read, had spent money on proper writing paper. That told him something, though he wasn't sure what. I can work. 3 words that shouldn't have felt like a knife between his ribs. But they did. Because what did it say about a man when his best hope was a stranger from Philadelphia who probably thought Arizona territory was still full of Apache raids and desperados? What did it say when you were 42 years old and asking someone you'd never met to save you from yourself? He stood. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the empty house, loud enough to make him wince. Walked to the window. His reflection looked back, gaunt face, eyes sunk too deep, hair that needed cutting and was going gray at the temples. A man he didn't quite recognize. A man his father wouldn't recognize. Frank Holloway had ridden past yesterday, slowed his horse to look at the dead grass, the thin cattle. Hadn't said anything. Didn't need to. The land spoke for itself. And what it said wasn't good. Jacob returned to the table, found the steel nib pen. The bottle of ink his mother had bought 20 years ago that was running low. Drew a sheet of paper toward him. His hand shook when he dipped the pen. Not from cold, the night was warm enough, but from something else. From the weight of admitting he couldn't do this alone. From knowing his father had been right and he'd been too stubborn to see it until the land was dying and the cattle were walking bones. The pen scratched. The sound filled the kitchen like something living. I'm 42. Ranch is failing. Can't promise much except hard work and a roof. That enough? He read it over. 4 sentences. Honest ones. The kind of honesty that tasted like copper. Like blood. His hand still shook when he signed his name. The signature looked like a child's scrawl. Unsteady, uncertain. He folded the letter. Found an envelope. Wrote her address on the front in his rough hand. Miss Emily Carter. 412 Walnut Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His own address on the back. The wax for sealing had cracked with age. He held it over the lamp, the one with the sooted chimney he still hadn't cleaned, and watched it melt. Drip red onto the envelope's seam. Pressed his thumb into it before it cooled. His print in the wax. Final. No taking it back now. Dawn was starting to gray the eastern window. The lamp looked sicker in the growing light. Wasteful to have it burning once the sun came up. He'd ride to Tucson today. 7 miles each way. Post this before good sense or pride or whatever was left of his father's voice could stop him. Before he could think too hard about what he was doing. About what it meant. A mail-order bride. Him. Jacob Turner. Whose father had owned the best ranch in the basin. Whose mother had hosted gatherings where families came from 20 miles around. Reduced to this. To begging a stranger to fix what he'd broken. He picked up the letter. Put it in his shirt pocket. Over his heart. The weight of it felt strange. Heavy. Or maybe that was hope. He couldn't tell which anymore. The eastern sky was turning pink. The cattle would need checking. The water trough had a leak he'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. The fence posts on the south section were rotting through. 100 things needed doing, and he was one man with dying land and no answers. But the letter in his pocket felt like something. Like a possibility. Like maybe. Just maybe. He hadn't run out of chances yet. His reflection in the window still looked like a stranger. But when he put on his hat and stepped out into the cool morning, heading for the barn to saddle his horse for the ride to Tucson, something in his chest felt different. Lighter. Or heavier. He wasn't sure. Just different. The land stretched gray and dead around him, but somewhere in Philadelphia. A woman who knew about soil and growing things was reading his words, making a decision that would change both their lives. He just didn't know it yet. If you've ever stood at a crossroads wondering if it's too late to change course, maybe you understand what Jacob felt that morning. Drop a comment and let us know where you're reading from. There's something comforting about knowing we're sharing these stories across kitchen tables and front porches all over this country. 2 weeks. 14 days of waiting and second-guessing and checking the road from Tucson like it would change what was coming. Jacob stood outside the stage station with his hat in his hands. The brim had a permanent crease now from gripping. His Sunday coat smelled like camphor and made his shoulders itch. He'd worn it twice in the last year, once for his father's funeral. Once for old man Dietrich's. Now this. The stage was late. An hour past noon, and the sun hammered down on the station's tin roof, on the hitching posts, on the 6 horses standing hip-shot in whatever shade they could find. Sweat traced down Jacob's spine. The shirt underneath the coat stuck to his skin. Dust cloud to the east. His throat went tight. 6 horses. Red paint peeling on the coach sides. The driver standing on the footboard. Reins in one hand. Whip in the other. The rig came in fast, wheels throwing dust that hung in the still air and coated everything the horses. The station. Jacob's carefully brushed coat. The driver hauled back, horses stamping. Blowing. Harness jingling. A woman's trunk lashed to the top of the coach, covered in dust so thick the leather looked gray. The door opened. A woman climbed down before the driver could help. Not delicate. Not the small-boned Eastern type Jacob had pictured lying awake these last 2 weeks. Sturdy. Maybe 5'6". Brown hair with gray streaks pulled back severe. Age showed in the lines at her eyes. The capable way she stepped down without waiting for a hand. She carried a leather satchel, brass clasps green with age, and a wooden box, tied with rope, held against her hip like it mattered more than anything else she owned. She looked at him, direct, no hesitation. "Mr. Turner." His mouth had gone dry. He swallowed. "Ma'am, I'm Emily Carter." She set down the satchel, but kept hold of the box. Looked past him at the wagon. "That yours?" "Yes'm." She walked toward it, not waiting, just moved, her skirt raising small dust clouds with each step, reached the wagon bed, looked at the boards, the wheels, ran her free hand along the sideboard like she was checking for splinters. "How far to your ranch?" 18 miles. She nodded once, turned back to face him, and her eyes were brown and direct, and held something he couldn't name. Not judgment. Something else. "We should get my trunk." She glanced at the box in her hands, then back at him. "I'll need to keep this with me. My father's journals. They're fragile." Jacob looked at the box. At her. At the way she held it, protective. Careful. Like it contained something more valuable than gold. "What kind of journals?" Her mouth did something. Not quite a smile. "The kind that might save your land. Mr. Turner, if you're willing to listen." The ride took 3 hours. Emily didn't fill the silence with chatter. She sat beside him on the wagon seat, the wooden box on her lap, and studied the land. Mile markers passed. 5 miles. 10. Jacob watched the road. She watched everything else. At mile 12, she spoke. "Your well, how deep?" 40 feet. Hitting water at what, 35? His hands tightened on the reins. "How'd you know that?" She pointed at a stand of mesquite off to the left. Water tables visible in the vegetation pattern. See how the mesquite's taller there. "Roots go deep. They're finding water your well's missing." Jacob looked at the trees. He'd passed them 1,000 times. Never noticed. "You graze year-round?" she asked. "Have to?" Her head turned. Brown eyes studied his face. "That's your problem." Heat crept up his neck. "I work this land every day." "Mrs. Carter. Miss Carter." She faced forward again. And working land isn't the same as understanding it. And the rest of the ride passed in silence. But the quiet felt different now. Heavier, like words unsaid were piling up between them. She saw the ranch from half a mile out. Didn't gasp. Didn't make a sound. Just looked at the gray pastures. The thin cattle. The house that needed paint. And nodded once. Jacob stopped the wagon. I can show you inside first. Let you rest from I need to see the property. She climbed down before he could help. Set the wooden box careful in the wagon bed. Walked toward the north pasture without waiting. Jacob followed. His jaw ached from clenching. She moved slow, stopped every 20 paces, knelt, took off her gloves, practical leather, well worn, and ran bare hands through the soil, examined plant roots, what little there was, traced old furrow lines with her fingers like she was reading Braille. At the fence line. She straightened, brushed her hands on her skirt. The dust left streaks across the butternut fabric. She turned to face him. Your father ran this place, 23 years. He rest his fields. Jacob's throat felt tight. The words stuck. Yeah, rotated. Left whole sections empty sometimes. And I thought that was wasting space. The admission tasted like copper. Needed every acre producing. She looked back at the gray soil. Didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, you mined it, like silver. His father's exact words. Jacob's hands curled into fists at his sides. Emily walked along the fence. Stopped at a patch where something green struggled to grow native grass. Stubborn. Refusing to die completely. She knelt again, pulled up a plant. Roots and all, held it toward him. See this, roots go down maybe 4 inches. Should be 8, 10. The soil's not holding moisture because there's nothing to hold. You've depleted it. I've tried. His voice came out rougher than intended. Wells, hay, winter feed. I've tried everything. You've tried everything except letting it rest. She dropped the plant. Stood. Her eyes met his without flinching. Land isn't dead, Mr. Turner. It's exhausted. There's a difference. The sun beat down on both of them. Sweat traced down Jacob's spine under the coat he should have taken off miles ago. A hawk circled overhead. Hunting. Finding nothing. What would you do? The question came out quiet. Start small. 1 acre test plot. Plant clover. Alfalfa. Let it die back into the soil naturally. See what happens. And if it doesn't work, then you've lost 1 acre you were losing anyway. He wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her Philadelphia women didn't understand Arizona land. Wanted to defend every decision he'd made these last 2 years, every choice that had seemed right at the time. But the cattle were walking bones. The soil came away gray in his hands. And she was looking at him like she'd seen all this before, and knew exactly how it would end if nothing changed. All right, the words cost him. 1 acre. The Justice of Peace arrived at sunset. Rode out from Tucson on a bay mare, saddlebags bulging with legal papers, and a Bible that had seen better days. Jacob had cleaned up. Changed shirts. Emily had done something to her hair, pinned it different, but still wore the traveling dress. Dust and all. They stood in the parlor. The J.P. opened his Bible. Read words Jacob didn't hear over the sound of his own pulse hammering in his ears. The room felt too small, too warm. Do you, Jacob Turner? I do. Miss Carter, do you? I do. The pen scratched. Emily signed first. Emily Carter Turner. Her handwriting clear and steady. Jacob's hand cramped when he took the pen. His signature looked like a child's scrawl next to hers. The JP left. $2 for the license, $3 for his time. The door closed behind him, and the house fell silent. Emily stood by the window. Jacob stood by the table. Neither looked at the other. "I'll sleep in the spare room," she said. "All right." She moved toward the hallway, stopped, turned back, crossed the room and put her hand on his forearm light. Brief, but deliberate. "Land doesn't forget how to live. Mr. Turner." Her voice was quiet, steady. "It's just been asked the wrong questions." She left him standing there. Her footsteps faded down the hall. A door opened, closed. Jacob looked at his forearm where her hand had been. The warmth of her touch lingered. Outside, in the dying light, the gray pastures stretched to the horizon. Waiting, exhausted, not dead. He walked to the window, pressed his palm against the glass. Somewhere in the house. His new wife was unpacking journals that might save land his father had loved and he'd broken. The question that kept him awake that night, staring at the ceiling of his empty bedroom, wasn't whether her methods would work. It was whether he deserved them to. Emily built the pile on the third morning. Jacob came around the side of the barn and stopped. She'd chosen a spot 20 feet from the house, close enough to the kitchen, far enough not to offend. A mound already waist-high, manure from the stalls, kitchen scraps, straw from the barn floor. She worked with a pitchfork, turning, mixing, building it higher. Steam rose from the center. "What are you doing?" The words came out sharper than he meant. She didn't stop working. "Composting. That's a pile of manure and decomposing plant matter. Yes." She drove the pitchfork in, stepped back, wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "It'll heat in the center. Kill weed seeds. Break down into something useful." The smell hit him, raw and thick. "It stinks." "It's supposed to." She picked up a bucket of kitchen scraps, coffee grounds, potato peels, something green he couldn't identify, dumped it on top. "Give it 6 weeks. It'll smell like earth." Hoofbeats on the road. Jacob turned. Frank Holloway, riding his Missouri fox trotter at an easy walk. The horse slowed, stopped. Frank sat in the saddle, one hand on the horn, looking at the pile, at Emily, at Jacob. "That your new wife, Turner." Jacob's neck burned. "Yeah. She building a manure pile. Appears so." Frank's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. He looked at Emily, who'd gone back to turning the pile with the pitchfork. Unbothered. "Well?" He touched his hat brim. "Good luck with that." He rode on. Dust settled behind him. Jacob stood there. Heat crawled up from his collar to his ears. The pile steamed. Emily worked. The whole basin would know about this by sunset. "You could have told me you were doing this." His voice came out tight. She looked up. "Would you have said yes?" "No." "That's why I didn't ask." She drove the pitchfork into the pile, left it standing, walked to him, stopped close enough he could see flecks of gray in her brown eyes. "Decomposition creates heat. Heat kills disease. The pile breaks down into nutrients your soil desperately needs. It's not complicated. Mr. Turner, it's just chemistry. It's embarrassing. Her eyebrows lifted. More embarrassing than dying cattle. He had no answer for that. She turned back to her work. The next day, they staked out the north pasture. Jacob carried the mallet. Emily carried rope and wooden stakes she'd had him cut from old fence posts. They walked to the section she'd chosen the worst acre on the property, where nothing green showed except a few struggling weeds. Here, she handed him a stake. He drove it into the ground. 3 swings with the mallet. The sound echoed flat across the dead land. She measured out 20 paces. Here. Another stake, another 3 swings. They worked in silence. The sun climbed. Sweat soaked through Jacob's shirt. Emily's sleeves were rolled to her elbows, her forearms already tanned darker than any Philadelphia woman's should be. At the 4th stake, she started talking. Plant roots go down looking for water. The deeper they go, the stronger the plant. But they need something to grow through, soil structure, organic matter. You've compacted this so hard. She pressed her boot heel into the ground. It barely left a mark. Nothing can penetrate. Jacob wiped his forehead. So the clover has roots that go down 3 feet. 4 if conditions are right. Dies back in winter. Leaves channels in the soil. Creates structure. She tied rope between the stakes they'd set. And it enriches soil. The plants do something, fix nitrogen somehow. Enrich the earth. That's... He stopped. Had been about to say impossible. Changed it to, that's something. She glanced at him. You don't believe me. I don't understand it. That's different. She pulled the rope taut. Tied it off. Understanding comes later. Belief comes first. They finished staking. Stood in the center of the roped-off acre. Gray dirt stretched in every direction. The rope looked fragile, temporary, like it might blow away in the first good wind. What if nothing grows? Jacob asked. Emily looked at him. Then we try again. What if it all fails? Are you asking about the clover or something else? His throat closed. He looked away. Her hand touched his arm. Brief. Light. 1 acre. Mr. Turner. That's all I'm asking you to risk. But they both knew it wasn't about the acre. Emily cooked cornbread that night. Real cornbread. Golden and steaming. With butter she'd somehow produced from nowhere. Jacob sat at the table and ate 2 pieces before he realized he hadn't had bread this good since his mother died. Where'd you get butter? Mercantile in Tucson. I bought some before the stage left. She poured coffee into his cup. The tin cup with the chipped rim he'd been drinking from for 3 years. Woman there was helpful. Mrs. Chen. Jacob grunted. Ate another piece. After dinner. Emily brought out her father's journals. Set them on the table. 12 volumes, leather-bound, water-stained, pages dog-eared and marked with notes in the margins. She opened one. The lamplight caught pencil drawings, root systems, cross-sections of soil, diagrams Jacob couldn't decipher. He took up his tack mending, needed to fix the bridle's cheek strap before it gave out entirely. The leather was stiff under his fingers. Did your father? Emily paused. Did he know it was failing before he died? Jacob's hands stopped, the needle halfway through the leather. Yeah. What did he say? Told me I was too stubborn to learn. The words came out flat. matter of fact, like they didn't still cut. "Were you—" He looked up. She watched him, her face serious in the lamplight. He pushed the needle through, pulled the thread tight. "Still am, apparently." Her mouth did something, not quite a smile. Small, real. It was the first time he'd seen her smile. His chest did something strange. He looked back down at the bridle. "My father died 2 years ago," she said, quiet. "Consumption. I nursed him 18 months. Jacob's hands stilled again. "He taught at the college," she continued. "Made barely enough to keep us fed. Spent everything on books, research. He could make things grow anywhere. In windowsill pots. In clay so hard nothing should have lived." She touched one of the journals. "After he died, the landlady felt sorry for me. Gave me a room cheap. Let me keep his journals. I think she thought I'd remarry quickly. Didn't understand why a woman would want dead man's notebooks. Why did you want them? Because they were all I had left of him. And because—" She stopped, started again. "Because growing things was the only thing he truly believed in. I wanted to believe in it too." The lamp hissed, outside. A coyote called. Distant, lonesome, Jacob went back to mending the bridle. Emily turned a page in the journal. The sound of paper rustling filled the kitchen. "You can call me Jacob," he said. Didn't look up from his work. "If you want." She didn't answer right away. He thought maybe she hadn't heard. Then, "All right, not Emily back, just, all right." But something had shifted. He felt it in the way the silence sat between them now. Not uncomfortable. Not exactly comfortable either, but different than it had been. He knotted off the thread, bit it clean, tested the strap. Solid. Tomorrow they'd plant the test acre. Scatter seed Emily had ordered from some catalog. See if anything would grow in soil that had forgotten how. But tonight, in this kitchen, with the lamplight making shadows on the walls, and his father's ghost a little quieter than usual, Jacob Turner sat with his wife and mended tack and listened to her turn pages. And when they both reached for the same fence post the next morning, her hand and his meeting on weathered wood, fingers touching for just a second before both pulled back, he wondered if maybe, possibly, she'd felt it shift too. 10 weeks after they had scattered seed on the test acre, Jacob walked the roped-off section at dawn. Green, not imagination, not wishful thinking in bad light. Actual green pushing through the gray soil in shoots no bigger than his smallest finger. He knelt. The dirt was still cool from night, damp from the dew that came even when rain didn't. Extended one finger, touched a leaf. Delicate. Alive. Impossibly fragile for something that had fought through compacted earth to reach air. Alfalfa. He recognized it from his father's fields. From before. Purple-green and distinct. And beside it, clover. Smaller, hardier. Doing work underground he couldn't see, but Emily had tried to explain with her diagrams and her talk of enriching soil. A board creaked. He looked up. Emily stood on the porch, coffee cup in hand. She wore the blue calico dress, the one without the bustle. Her hair was pinned up, but coming loose already in the morning heat. She didn't wave, didn't call out, just watched. He stood, brushed dirt from his knee, looked back at the green shoots thin, tender, barely 3 inches tall, but they're real, growing. Looked at her, nodded once. She nodded back. His throat felt tight. He swallowed. Walked toward the barn for morning chores, but his hands shook when he picked up the pitchfork. He moved 3 head to the new pasture section 2 weeks later, 2 heifers and a young steer, the ones in worst shape ribs showing, coats dull brown, eyes listless. "You sure about this?" Emily asked. She'd come out to watch, wiping her hands on her apron. "No." He opened the gate. The cattle moved slow, suspicious. "But you said test it." "I said test the soil, not risk your cattle on experimental grass." "Grass is grass." Her eyebrow lifted, but she didn't argue. The cattle grazed, uncertain at first, then with more interest. The green growth was sparse, barely ankle-deep now, after 12 weeks. But it was green. And it was something different than the gray stubble they'd been subsisting on. 3 weeks passed. Jacob checked them every morning, every evening, walked the fence line, counted ribs, watched. On the 21st day, he noticed. The steer's coat had changed. Not dull brown anymore. Burnished red, like someone had polished it. He ran his hand along the animal's flank. Solid. More weight than there'd been 3 weeks ago. Not much, but some. The heifers looked brighter, heads up, eyes clearer, moving with more energy when he approached. He checked them that evening after dinner, walked out with the last of the light, and stood at the fence. Counting ribs. Couldn't count as many as before. In the morning. He checked again before coffee. At midday, he found excuses to walk past. Evening. He brought his coffee out and leaned against the fence post, watching them graze in the failing light. "You're going to wear a path in the dirt," Emily said behind him. He turned. She'd come out without him hearing, stood 10 feet back with her arms crossed, just looking. "You've been just looking 6 times today. They're healthier, I know." She came to stand beside him, not touching, but close enough he could smell the lye soap she used, lavender, somehow. He'd never asked how she made soap smell like anything but lye. "You did good, choosing them for the test. The worst ones. You mean, the ones that needed it most?" She leaned against the fence. "That's good animal sense?" They stood in silence. The cattle grazed. Grasshoppers clicked in the evening heat. The sun touched the horizon, turned the sky orange and red. "Your father would be proud," she said. Quiet. Jacob's jaw tightened. "My father would say I should have listened to him from the start." "Maybe." She glanced at him. "But he'd still be proud you listened eventually." The light died. Stars started coming out. Neither of them moved. Frank Holloway rode up 3 days later. Jacob was repairing the water trough leak in the corner seam needed patching before they lost what little well water they had. He heard the hoofbeats. Looked up. Frank on his fox trotter. That distinctive 4-beat gait unmistakable. "Turner! Frank!" The older man swung down, tied his horse to the rail. Walked to the test acre without asking. Stood at the rope line, looking at the green growth that was knee-high now in places. Thick and healthy, where 2 months ago there'd been nothing but dust. "I'll be blessed." Jacob set down his hammer, wiped his hands on his pants, joined Frank at the rope. "Clover," Jacob said, "and alfalfa. He stopped. Started again. "Emily's rotating, letting fields rest." "Emily, huh?" Heat crawled up Jacob's neck. "Mrs. Turner." Frank's mouth twitched. "Your neck's red. Turner. It's hot." "Sure it is." Frank studied the green growth, looked at the 3 cattle in the adjacent section, looked back at Jacob. "Those the same animals were here last month?" "Yeah. They look different. They're healthier. Better feed." Frank turned, looked at Jacob square, held his eyes for a long moment. Then, "You letting your wife teach you farming?" Jacob's shoulders stiffened. The question sat between them like a challenge, like something that mattered more than it should. "Yeah," he said finally. Met Frank's eyes. Didn't look away. "I am." Frank nodded slow. Looked back at the green acre. "Smart man." He walked to his horse, gathered the reins, swung up. "You tell Mrs. Turner I might stop by sometime. Ask her about that composting pile. Wife's been after me to try something new with the garden." He rode off. Dust settled behind him. Jacob stood there, the test acre green at his back, the words "smart man" sitting strange in his chest. The kitchen door opened. Emily came out, drying her hands on a dish towel. "He stayed longer than usual. Asked about your methods." "Gunsum." "What did you tell him?" Jacob looked at her, at the way afternoon light caught the gray in her hair, at her capable hands, at the dress that wasn't fancy but fit her like she belonged here. "Told him you were rotating crops, letting fields rest. And he called me a smart man." Her mouth curved, small, real. "You explained it right. Had a good teacher." Something passed between them. Not words, something else. Something that made his pulse kick up and his hands go still on the hammer handle. She went back inside. Jacob returned to the water trough, picked up his hammer, but his hands weren't steady, and he had to set it down again. Stand there breathing, looking at nothing. Sunset found them both in the test acre. Emily had come out to check the growth patterns. Jacob had followed because he didn't want to be in the barn alone. Because watching her move through green grass with her skirt brushing the clover made something in him ache. Because she'd asked if he wanted to come, and he'd said yes before thinking. They stood in the center, ankle-deep in growth that had been gray dust 3 months ago, the sky bleeding orange and purple, the air cooling finally from the day's heat. "You were right," Jacob said. His voice came out rougher than intended. "It wasn't dead." Emily turned, looked at him. The dying light caught her eyes, turned them almost gold. "Neither were you." The words hit him in the chest. He opened his mouth, closed it. Didn't know what to say to that, to the truth of it. She looked away first, knelt, ran her hands through the clover like she'd run her hands through his dying soil that first day. But her touch was different now, reverent, like she was praying. "This is just the beginning," she said. 1 acre. We can do more. Rotate the whole north pasture. Plant the south section next spring." "Emily." She stopped, looked up at him. He didn't know what he'd meant to say. Lost the words somewhere between his brain and his mouth. Just stood there like a fool while the light died and the first stars came out, and this woman he'd married out of desperation knelt in green grass that shouldn't exist and looked at him like he was worth something. "Jacob," his name in her voice. First time she'd said it. His chest went tight. "Thank you. For what? Everything. The land. The teaching. for not giving up on him when he'd been too stubborn and proud and broken to save himself, for coming to Arizona when she could have stayed in Philadelphia, for building a pile that embarrassed him, for making his coffee the way he liked it without asking how, for being here. The grass, he said, because he was a coward, for making it grow. She stood, brushed dirt from her skirt. The light was almost gone now. He could barely see her face. You made it grow. Jacob, I just showed you how. She walked past him. Her shoulder brushed his arm. The touch lasted half a second. Might have been an accident. But his skin burned where she'd touched him. And he stood in that green acre until full dark came, and the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in his chest, something that had been locked tight for 2 years started, very slowly, to open. And the question that kept him awake that night, lying in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to her move in the room down the hall, wasn't about the land anymore. It was whether a man who'd broken everything his father built deserved a second chance at something that looked an awful lot like happiness. The rain stopped on the 1st of July. Not stopped, just never came. Days stacked into weeks. The sky stayed blue and hard as enamel. The new green growth in the test acre began to wilt. Jacob counted, couldn't help it. 14 days without rain. The clover leaves curled at the edges. 17 days. The alfalfa yellowed. 20 days. He woke before dawn and walked the acre in the dark, running his hands over leaves that felt papery and brittle. Emily found him there on day 21. We need to hand water, she said. He looked at the acre, at the well, at the impossible distance between them. It'll take all day. Then we start now. She walked back toward the house. Jacob stood in the dying grass and wanted to throw something. They rigged channels first, shallow trenches from the well to the test acre. Emily drew diagrams in the dirt with a stick, showed him where water would flow with least waste. They dug with shovels until Jacob's shoulders screamed and sweat soaked through his shirt, and the sun hammered down like something with weight. The channels held water for maybe 10 minutes before the parched earth drank it all. Buckets, then, Emily said. Small buckets, pails that held maybe 2 gallons each. 20 pounds when full. They filled them at the well, carried them to the acre, poured them out, walked back. The well crank squeaked with each turn. The rope frayed where it ran over the pulley. By noon, Jacob's hands had blistered. By evening, the blisters had torn and bled. Emily's hands looked worse. Soft Philadelphia hands not made for this. But she didn't stop. Didn't complain. Just filled and carried and poured and walked back. They worked 8 hours that first day. Collapsed on the porch steps after dark. Too tired to eat. We'll do it again tomorrow, Emily said. Jacob said nothing, just sat there with his head in his hands. Day 3 of hand watering. Day 24 without rain. Jacob woke with his shoulders locked tight. Could barely lift his arms. Forced himself up anyway. Found Emily already at the well, already filling buckets. They worked. The sun climbed. The heat pressed down like a physical thing. Jacob's vision swam. He missed his footing on the 7th trip, spilled half a bucket, swore under his breath, went back to the well. Emily moved like a machine. Steady, relentless. He watched her pour a bucket, wipe her forehead, walk back. Her dress was dark with sweat. Her hands bled. The blisters had broken and wouldn't heal, kept tearing open with each bucket handle. But she didn't stop. The clover perked up in the sections they'd watered. Stood straighter. The color came back. For maybe 6 hours. Then the heat stole it again, day 7, day 28, without rain. Jacob's hands were raw. The rope burned when he pulled it. The buckets felt like they weighed 50 pounds each. His back spasmed when he bent to pour. He gritted his teeth. Poured anyway. Emily stumbled on the path. Caught herself. Kept walking. That night they sat on the porch in silence. Jacob brought out a plate of cornbread neither of them touched. The stars came out. The temperature dropped maybe 5 degrees. Not enough. "Your hands," Emily said. Her voice sounded rough. "You should wrap them. Yours too." She held them up, even in starlight. He could see the torn skin. The blood dried brown in the creases. The flesh raw and weeping. "We're killing ourselves for 1 acre, he said. "Yes. Might not even work. Might not. Then why?" He stopped, his throat closed. She didn't answer. Just sat there with her ruined hands in her lap. Looking at the dark shape of the test acre they couldn't see, but both knew was there. Day 10 of hand watering. Day 31 without rain. Jacob threw the bucket. Didn't mean to. Didn't plan it. Just finished pouring. Turned to walk back to the well for what felt like the 1,000th time. And something in him snapped. The bucket left his hand. Sailed across the yard. Hit the fence. Clattered into the dirt. He stood there. Chest heaving. Hands shaking. Emily set down her bucket. Didn't say anything. Just walked to the porch steps and sat. Jacob followed. Sat beside her. His legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "My father died thinking I killed his legacy." The words came out flat, dead. 23 years he worked this land. I destroyed it in 2. Did he say that? Didn't have to. I saw it in his face. Jacob looked at his hands. Raw and bleeding and useless. He was right about me. A coyote called, distant. The sound carried in the still air. "My mother died when I was 12, Emily said. Her voice was quiet, careful. Father never remarried, devoted himself to his research, to his books. I thought..." She stopped, breathed, started again. "I thought that was love, devotion. Turns out it was just loneliness wearing a different face." Jacob turned his head, looked at her in the darkness. "I nursed him 18 months, she continued. Watched him die by inches, consumption, every day a little less of him. And you know what he said at the end?" Her voice cracked. "He apologized for wasting his life on dirt and books instead of on me." The stars wheeled overhead, impossibly bright, impossibly far. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go," Emily said, "because I was tired of being pitied, tired of being alone in a room full of dead man's journals, tired of..." She stopped. Of what? Of being the woman nobody wanted. Jacob's chest hurt. "Emily, I know what I am, 38, plain, too educated for my own good, the kind of woman who builds compost piles and reads agricultural journals and frightens men off." She looked at him. "I know why you married me. Desperation. Not choice. I'm not stupid." "You're not plain." She laughed. No humor in it. Don't. You're brilliant and capable. And he didn't have the words, didn't know how to say that watching her work made his chest tight, that her hands in the soil looked like prayer, that he'd started looking forward to dinner not for the food, but for the sound of her voice. You're not plain. Silence stretched between them, long, thick. Then her hand found his in the darkness. He froze. Her fingers were rough with torn blisters, warm, shaking slightly. She didn't grip tight, just rested her hand on his, like a question. He turned his palm up, laced his fingers through hers. We don't fail alone anymore, she whispered. His throat closed. He nodded. Couldn't speak. They sat like that until the stars shifted, until the air cooled another degree, until exhaustion pulled them down and sideways, and they ended up slumped against each other on the porch steps, her head on his shoulder, his hand still holding hers. Jacob meant to get up, go inside, sleep in his bed. But Emily's breathing had evened out. She was asleep, and he didn't want to move, didn't want to let go of her hand. So he stayed. The stars wheeled. The coyotes called. His back ached against the porch post. His legs cramped. His hands throbbed where the blisters had torn and wouldn't heal. He'd never been more uncomfortable, or more certain he was exactly where he needed to be. He woke to gray light and Emily's weight gone from his shoulder, sat up. His back screamed. His neck had locked at an angle that sent pain shooting down his spine. He blinked, looked around. Emily stood at the porch rail, looking east. Her hair had come loose from its pins in the night, fell down her back in a brown-gray wave he'd never seen before. Emily. She turned. Her face was strange in the dawn light, open, vulnerable, raw in a way he'd never seen. Her eyes found his and held. It's going to rain, she said. He stood, joints popping, every muscle protesting, walked to the rail beside her, looked where she was looking, clouds on the horizon. Dark, heavy, moving fast. How do you... Thunder rolled, low, promising. The first drop hit his face. Cold, perfect, then another, and another. Emily tilted her face up, let the rain hit her closed eyes. Her mouth curved into something he'd never seen before. Joy. Pure and unguarded. Jacob looked at her, at the rain beginning to fall, at the woman who'd saved his land, and maybe saved him too, and realized with absolute certainty that somewhere in the last 13 weeks, between the compost pile and the hand-watering and the night on the porch steps, he'd stopped being grateful and started being something else entirely. Something that scared him more than failure ever had. The rain had left everything green. 2 inches in 4 hours. The test acre stood thick with clover and alfalfa that looked almost obscene in its health. The channels they'd dug had filled and overflowed. The compost pile steamed in the morning sun. Even the gray pastures beyond the roped-off acre showed hints of color sparse. Tentative, but there. Jacob sat at the kitchen table with coffee he'd barely touched. His hands still hurt. The blisters had scabbed over but pulled when he flexed his fingers. Emily moved around the kitchen, making breakfast. Scrambled eggs with wild onions she'd found somewhere. The smell made his stomach turn. She set a plate in front of him, sat down across from him, with her own. I want to host a seed exchange, she said. He looked up. A what? Families bring seeds, trade varieties, share knowledge about what works in this soil. She cut into her eggs, calm, like she was discussing the weather. Next Saturday. Jacob's jaw tightened. No. Why not? Because I don't want charity. It's not charity, it's community. There's a difference. Is there? He pushed his plate away. The fork clattered against the tin. Everyone in the basin knows this ranch was failing. You want to invite them here so they can see how bad it got, so they can— His throat closed. So they can pity us. Emily set down her fork, looked at him with those brown eyes that saw too much. They already know. Jacob, everyone struggles. The question is together or alone. I've been alone for 2 years, managed fine. You weren't managing. You were dying when I got here. The land was dying. Your cattle were dying. Her voice stayed level, quiet. And you wrote to a stranger in Philadelphia asking her to come fix it because you couldn't do it yourself. The words hit like fists. Jacob stood. The chair scraped loud against the floor, nearly toppled. That's different. How? Because— He stopped. His hands were shaking. Because that was just you, not the whole basin watching me fail. You're not failing anymore. Look outside. 1 acre. Emily. 1 acre of green in 50 that are still mostly dead. So show them how you did it. Teach them what I taught you. She stood too. Came around the table. Stopped 3 feet from him. Let them see what's possible. He couldn't look at her. Looked at the floor instead. At his boots that needed resoling. At the worn boards his father had walked on. What if they think we're begging? His voice came out rough. Raw. What if they come out of— The word stuck in his throat like something sharp. Out of pity. And leave laughing at the fool who had to get his wife to save him. Then they're fools. She moved closer. Close enough he could smell the soap on her skin. Lavender. But I don't think they will. I think Frank Holloway wants to know about composting. I think the Mendozas want to know about water management. I think people are tired of failing alone and just need someone to go first. Jacob's hands curled into fists at his sides. The scabs pulled. Small pain. Grounding. 1 gathering, Emily said. If it's awful, we never do it again, but if it helps— She paused. If it helps even 1 family save their land the way we saved ours, isn't that worth the risk? He looked at her finally. At the gray in her hair that caught the morning light. At her capable hands that were still healing from the buckets. At the woman who'd come to save his land, and somehow saved something else, too. All right, he said. The word came out quiet. Defeated. 1. They cleaned the barn on Friday. Jacob swept while Emily organized. Moved old tack to the walls. Stacked hay bales for seating, 8 of them arranged in a rough circle. Found benches he'd forgotten existed, buried under 2 years of neglect, and hauled them out to the yard to beat the dust off with a broom. The barn smelled like horses and old hay and leather oil. Good smells. Familiar. Emily worked beside him, moving quiet and efficient. When they both reached for the same hay bale, their shoulders bumped. She didn't pull away immediately. Neither did he. They stood like that for a second, touching. Not touching. Something humming in the air between them. Where'd you learn to bake? He asked. Needed to say something. The silence had started feeling too heavy. My mother. Before she died. Emily dragged the bale to the wall, positioned it next to 3 others. She could make bread out of nothing. Flour, water, salt. But it always tasted like more. What are you making tomorrow? Apple cake. Mrs. Perkins traded me dried apples for eggs last week. You've been planning this? She looked at him. Yes. They worked until the barn looked like something respectable, until the benches stood in rows and the floor was swept and the space looked like it could hold people without embarrassment, without shame. Emily stepped back, surveyed their work, nodded once. It's good, she said. Jacob looked around. The barn hadn't been this clean since his father's funeral, since the day they'd laid the old man out on planks across sawhorses and the whole basin had come to pay respects, to see the end of something. His chest went tight. Jacob. He shook his head. Nothing, just... He gestured at the clean floor, the arranged hay bales. Haven't seen it like this in a while. But she looked at him like she knew, like she could see his father's ghost standing in the corner, arms crossed, watching, judging whether this gathering would be the beginning of something or just another failure. She touched his arm. Light, brief. He'd be proud of this. He'd say I should have done it years ago. Maybe, but he'd still be proud you're doing it now. Saturday came hot and still. 5 wagons arrived between noon and 1. Jacob watched from the porch, his stomach acid. Emily stood beside him in her good dress, the butternut calico she'd worn on the stage. She'd pinned her hair up careful, looked almost pretty in the harsh light. Frank Holloway came first, his wife beside him. 2 boys in the wagon bed, maybe 10 and 12, sunburned and squinting. Then the Mendoza's whole family, 6 of them packed into a wagon that needed new springs. Widow Perkins in her black dress, driving her own wagon with hands that shook on the reins. A young couple Jacob didn't know well, Sarah and Tom Weaver from the South Valley. And old Klaus Dietrich, the Dutch farmer. Alone. Emily walked down to greet them. Jacob followed because standing on the porch alone felt like cowardice, like hiding. Thank you for coming, Emily said. Her voice was warm, easy. Nothing in it suggested they were desperate, that this gathering mattered more than it should. We've set up in the barn, coffee's hot. The families climbed down. Unloaded baskets, seed packets wrapped in old newspaper, mason jars of preserves brought as gifts, peaches, pickles, something that looked like tomato relish. The children ran off immediately, 3 boys and 2 girls, their voices high and bright in the yard. Jacob's throat tightened. He hadn't heard children's laughter on this ranch since before his father died, since before everything started dying. They walked to the barn, awkward at first, people finding seats on the hay bales, on the benches, not sure where to look, not sure why they'd come. Emily poured coffee from the large pot she'd set up on a plank across 2 barrels, handed out tin cups, some from their kitchen, some she'd borrowed from somewhere. Her hands moved sure, confident. Mrs. Perkins, Emily said, I heard you grow the best squash in the county. What's your secret? The old woman's face creased. Ain't no secret, just manure and patience. How much manure? More than you'd think. Layer it thick in fall. Let it break down over winter. Laughter. Small. Real. The sound broke something in the barn's stillness. Emily moved through the group, asked questions, drew people out, got Klaus talking about his composting method different than hers. He said, layered different. Maybe better for clay soil. Got Mendoza talking about old irrigation channels. Acequias his grandfather had dug that still held water when wells ran dry. Got Sarah Weaver to mention her mother's trick for tomatoes, plant them deep. Bury half the stem. More roots that way. Jacob stood against the wall, watching. His wife, and she was his wife. The paper said so. Even if they'd barely touched, except by accident, moved through these people like she'd known them her whole life. Made them comfortable. Made them talk. Made them share things they might not have shared otherwise. Frank pulled him aside. "Your wife's something. Turner." Jacob looked at Emily. At the way she listened when people talked. Really listened. Like their words mattered. "Yeah. You treating her right?" The question caught him off guard. He met Frank's eyes, older eyes, knowing, trying to... "Keep trying," Frank clapped his shoulder. "Woman like that doesn't come along twice." The afternoon wore on. Seeds got traded packets of this for packets of that. Varieties that worked here, types that didn't. Knowledge got shared. Klaus brought out a harmonica as the sun started dropping. Played Red River Valley, slow and sweet. The children came back in from the yard. Faces dirty, laughing about something only they understood. Jacob stood in the barn doorway. Watched Emily laugh with the women over something Mrs. Perkins said, some joke about husbands and stubbornness he didn't catch. Watched the light come through the barn boards and catch in her hair where it was coming loose from its pins. Watched her hands gesture as she talked. Those capable hands that had saved his land. Something in his chest cracked open. This was what his father had built. Not just a ranch, not just cattle and grass and dirt, but this people gathered, sharing, helping each other make it through another season. Community, belonging. And Emily had brought it back. Frank appeared beside him again. "Cattle prices are up. Good demand in Tucson. I'll buy your spring calves when they come 40 a head." Jacob turned. Stared. $40 a head. He had 12 calves coming. Maybe more. That was nearly $500. Enough to pay the mortgage. Enough to buy more seed. Enough. "You mean that wouldn't say it otherwise?" Frank grinned. "You've got healthy stock now. Worth paying for." He glanced at Emily, still talking with the women. "Might want to thank that wife of yours." After Frank walked away. Jacob did the math again in his head. $500. Maybe more. For the first time in 2 years. The number in his head wasn't about how much he owed. It was about what he could do. Emily caught his eye from across the barn. Smiled. Small. Just for him? He smiled back. Felt his face crack with it, felt something in his chest that might have been hope, or joy, or something he didn't have a name for yet. The families left as the sun touched the horizon, wagons rolling away in dust clouds, the children's voices fading, Klaus's harmonica the last sound to go, carrying over the empty land until distance took it. Jacob and Emily stood in the yard, alone again. "That was good," she said. "Yeah, Frank made you an offer. 40 a head for the calves." He looked at her. "You did that. We did that. Together." She turned to face him fully. Her hair was coming loose, face flushed from the heat and the afternoon. "You let people see what was possible. That takes something." His throat felt tight. He reached for her hand, found it, held it. They stood like that as the light died, as the stars came out, as the temperature dropped and the land cooled, and somewhere in the distance a coyote started its evening song. But when he turned to tell Emily something to say, what? He wasn't sure. Just something about what was building in his chest. He saw her other hand pressed against her belly, saw her face gone pale. Emily. She swayed, just slightly. He caught her elbow. I'm fine. But her voice sounded strange, thin. Just I need to sit. He guided her to the porch steps. She sat, breathed slow and deliberate. Color came back to her face, but not all the way. When did you last eat? He asked. This morning. I was too... She stopped, swallowed. Too focused on getting ready. He started to stand. I'll get you water. No, stay. Her hand caught his. Just stay. So he sat, watched her breathe, watched color slowly return. But something cold had settled in his gut. After a long moment, she said, I've been sick. The last few mornings... Jacob went still. Just mornings, she continued. Her voice was quiet, careful. Nothing else, just... She paused. I'm fairly certain. He stared at her hand still pressed to her belly, at the way she wouldn't quite meet his eyes. Emily. She looked at him finally. I think I'm carrying a baby. Their baby. Growing inside her right now, while they sat on these porch steps under stars that wheeled overhead, under a sky that went on forever. His mouth had gone dry. Are you sure? Not completely, but... She touched her belly again. Yes, I think so. Well... The word came out strangled. He tried again. That's, well, she laughed. Actually laughed, though it sounded shaky. That's all you have to say. He didn't have words, didn't know what to say to this, to the enormity of it. He pulled her against him instead, held her careful, like she might break. Are you happy? The question came out muffled against her hair. She pulled back to look at him. Her eyes were wet. Are you... I asked first? Yes. Her voice cracked. Terrified. But yes, me too. They sat pressed together as full dark came. As the land cooled and the stars multiplied and the weight of what they'd made the ranch coming back. The community gathering. This child between them settled over them like promise and terror both. But later, lying in his bed alone, they still kept separate rooms, still maintained that last distance. Jacob stared at the ceiling and thought about Emily's pale face, about the way she'd swayed, about how she'd been working herself near to death these last months, about how women died bringing children into the world. And the fear that had been building all evening finally found words. What if saving his land cost him everything else that mattered? The gathering had ended 3 hours ago, but Jacob could still smell the coffee, still hear Klaus's harmonica in his head. He sat on the porch steps, Emily beside him. Not touching, just close. The sky had changed. Clouds had been building since afternoon. He'd noticed them stacking to the west during the gathering. Dark and heavy, moving slow but deliberate. Now they filled half the sky. The air smelled different, thick, promising. Storm coming, Emily said. Thunder rolled, low and distant, the kind that came before rain. Jacob's hands were clasped between his knees. He'd been sitting here trying to find words for the last 20 minutes. Failing. I need to tell you something, he said. She turned her head, waited. This wasn't supposed to be real. His voice came out rough. The marriage. I thought we'd just work together, share a house, be... He stopped. I don't know what I thought. I know. But it is real for me. He made himself look at her. I don't know when it happened. Somewhere between the compost pile and the hand watering, and he gestured, helpless. And everything. Lightning flickered in the western sky. Her face went bright for a second, then dark again. For me, too, she said. The words hit him in the chest, made breathing hard. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The first drops started, big, heavy, hitting the porch with sounds like small stones. Emily stood, held out her hand. Come on! We need to check the plants. They both knew it was an excuse. The plants would be fine. Rain was what they'd been praying for. But Jacob took her hand and stood and followed her into the weather. It came down harder. Within minutes, they were soaked. Jacob's shirt stuck to his back, his chest. Water ran down his face, into his eyes. Emily's dress darkened from butternut to brown, the fabric clinging. Her hair, still pinned up from the gathering, started coming loose, strands falling, plastered to her neck. They walked to the test acre. Rain hammered the clover, the alfalfa. The ground drank it in like something starved. Steam rose where drops hit sun-heated earth. The smell rain on parched soil filled Jacob's nose, his lungs. Petrichor. Emily had taught him the word. She knelt, ran her hands through the grass. Water streamed down her arms, dripped from her elbows. It's working, she said. Had to raise her voice over the rain. Look. Jacob knelt beside her. The plants stood straight despite the downpour, strong, healthy, green that almost hurt after months of gray. He looked at Emily instead, at her face tilted up to the rain, at water running down her neck, disappearing into her collar, at her hair falling loose. He'd never seen it down before, brown and gray, hanging wet past her shoulders. She turned, caught him looking. They stayed like that, kneeling in mud, rain pouring down, staring at each other while thunder cracked overhead and lightning turned the world white for seconds at a time. Jacob moved first, reached for her. His hand cupped her face, wet skin, warm underneath. Her eyes went wide, then soft, something in them he'd never seen before. He leaned in, kissed her. She froze for half a second, then kissed back. Her hands came up, fisted in his soaked shirt, pulled him closer. The kiss was messy, desperate, rain streaming between their faces, into their mouths, mud on both their knees. Nothing graceful about it. Perfect. When they broke apart, she was laughing. Actually laughing. The sound broke something loose in his chest that had been locked tight for longer than 2 years. Longer than he could remember. We're covered in mud, she said. Don't care? Your shirt's ruined. Don't care about that either. She kissed him again. Softer this time. Slower. Her hands moved from his shirt to his face, cradling his jaw like he was something worth holding careful. Thunder cracked, close. The rain came down harder, if that was possible. They were soaked through. Muddy. 40 years old between them and acting like fools in a rainstorm. Jacob had never been happier. He stood, pulled her up. She swayed, that thing she'd been doing since telling him about the baby. He caught her waist, steadied her. You all right? Better than all right? Her hair hung loose and dripping. Strands stuck to her face, her neck. Her dress clung to her frame. She looked nothing like the careful, pinned-up woman who'd stepped off the stage 4 months ago. She looked like she belonged here. We should go inside, he said. Didn't mean it. Probably. Neither of them moved. Lightning flashed, thunder right after, loud enough to feel in his chest. The storm was directly overhead now. Rain so thick Jacob could barely see the barn through it. Emily's hand found his, laced fingers through his, squeezed. "I was afraid to hope for this," she said. Her voice was quiet, but he heard it anyway over the rain. "For being wanted, not needed wanted. I want you." His arm came around her waist, pulled her against him. Water ran between them, their clothes soaked through so he could feel the warmth of her through the fabric. "Wanted you before I knew how to say it." She pressed her face into his shoulder. He felt her breath against his wet shirt, felt her shaking slightly. "Are you cold?" "No." She pulled back, looked up at him. Rain ran down both their faces, dripped from their chins. "I'm happy. That's all. Just happy." He kissed her again. Let it linger. Let himself feel the weight of her against him, the reality of her in his arms. The woman who'd saved his land, who'd saved him, who was carrying his child. When they finally walked back to the house hand in hand, soaked, muddy, slipping once and both nearly going down, Jacob left his boots on the porch. Emily's shoes beside them, caked with mud. Their clothes dripped puddles on the floor. She looked at him, really looked, her hair plastered to her shoulders, dress clinging, breathing hard. Her eyes held a question. He nodded. She led him to her room, the one she'd been sleeping in alone for 16 weeks. Not his. Hers. The lamp stayed unlit. Dawn came gray and soft. Jacob woke with Emily's head on his shoulder. Her hand spread over his chest. Her breathing was even, deep, asleep. He didn't move, didn't want to wake her, but his eyes were open, staring at the ceiling of a room that wasn't his but felt more like home than anywhere he'd slept in 2 years. The rain had stopped. He could tell from the silence. No patter on the roof, no drip from the eaves, just quiet. Emily stirred. Her fingers curled against his ribs. She made a small sound, not quite awake yet, and pressed closer. His throat went tight. This was what he'd needed without knowing it. Not just help with the land, not just someone to work beside, but this waking up next to someone, partnership, intimacy, being wanted. She opened her eyes, blinked, focused on his face. "Morning," she said. Her voice was rough with sleep. "Morning. Did you sleep? Some?" He brushed hair back from her face, still damp from last night. "You, better than I have in months?" She stretched, winced slightly, put a hand to her belly. "Baby's active this morning." Jacob's hand covered hers, felt the slight curve that was more visible now that they were here. In bed, her nightgown thin between his palm and her skin. "Can you feel it move yet?" "Not yet. Too early. But I can feel." She stopped. "Something different, like my body knows." They lay like that, his hand over hers, both of them quiet. Morning light growing stronger through the window. "We should check the land," Emily said finally. "We should." Neither moved. Eventually they got up, dressed, walked outside together into a world that had changed. Green. Everywhere Jacob looked. The test acre stood thick with clover and alfalfa, drinking in the rain. The channels they'd dug had done their work. Water had spread to sections they hadn't even planted yet. Native grasses coming back in places that had been bare dust. The cattle grazed in morning light, 32 head now. Healthy, their coats shining even wet from rain. The gray pastures beyond showed green coming through. Not much. Not everywhere. But there. Emily's hand found his. He laced his fingers through hers. They walked the property slow, taking it in. The land his father had worked. The land Jacob had nearly killed. The land that was breathing again. At the north fence line. Emily leaned against him. He put his arm around her shoulders. They stood like that, watching the sun climb, watching their ranch live. "Thank you," Jacob said, "for what? Everything. The land, the teaching, He gestured. Couldn't find words big enough. "All of it." She turned in his arms, looked up at him. Morning light caught her face, showed the lines at her eyes, the gray in her hair. The woman she was, capable and brilliant, and his. "You taught me something too," she said. "What? That it's not too late?" Her hand came up, touched his face. "For any of it. New starts. Second chances." Her voice dropped. "Love." His chest hurt. Good hurt. The kind that meant something opening instead of closing. "We're going to be all right," he said. "Yeah, we are." They walked back to the house, hand in hand. The green acre behind them. The cattle healthy. The land healing. A baby growing. A community willing to help. Frank's offer for the calves. The mortgage they could finally pay. But when they reached the porch, Emily swayed. Harder than before. Her face went pale, bloodless. She gripped the rail. "Emily, I'm fine." But her voice was thin, strained, wrong. He helped her sit, watched color slowly come back, but not all the way. Her hand still pressed to her belly. Protective. But something in her face looked scared. "How long have you been feeling like this?" he asked. "Just mornings. It's normal. How long, Emily?" She looked at him. 3 weeks, maybe more. 3 weeks. She'd been sick for 3 weeks and said nothing. Worked herself near to death hand-watering while carrying his child, and never said a word. "We're going to Tucson," he said. "Today, the doctor needs to see you. Jacob, it's just, please." Something in his voice stopped her. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." But even as she leaned against him, and they sat watching the sun climb over green pastures and healthy cattle, the cold in Jacob's gut didn't leave. Because he'd finally found something worth keeping. The land was healing. His wife was here. A child was coming. And the thought of losing any of it, of losing her, was worse than watching his father's ranch die had ever been. 3 weeks after the rain, the ranch looked like something from before, from when Jacob's father was alive, and the land knew how to breathe. Jacob stood at the kitchen table, watching Emily's hands move. She was teaching him seed saving, how to select the best pods, when to harvest, how to dry them without losing next year's growth. Her fingers worked quick and sure, separating seeds into labeled envelopes, neat handwriting on each one, Clover, North Acre. August 1883. Alfalfa. Test plot. August 1883. "You press too hard," she said without looking up. "The seeds bruise." He lightened his grip, tried again. The pod split clean. Seeds fell into his palm, small, dark, holding next season's promise. "Better," she said, outside. The second gathering was planned for Sunday after church, Frank's suggestion. More families this time. Word had spread about the green acres, about the healthy cattle, about whatever the Turners were doing that worked. Emily pressed a hand to her belly. Small gesture. Quick! But Jacob saw it. She'd been doing that more often this last week. You feeling all right? Fine? She looked up, smiled. Just active this morning. The curve at her waist was visible now when she wore the blue calico, not much, maybe 4 months along. The doctor in Tucson had said when Jacob insisted on taking her. Healthy, normal, nothing to worry about. But Jacob worried anyway. Couldn't help it. She'd been sick yesterday morning, and the morning before. The doctor said that would pass after the first few months. Said it was natural. Said women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and most of them managed fine. Most. Not all. We don't have to do the gathering, he said. If you're tired. I'm not tired. I'm pregnant. There's a difference. She went back to sorting seeds. Besides, Klaus asked if he could bring his nephew, the one studying in Tucson, and Mrs. Perkins wants to show everyone her preservation method. Jacob picked up another pod. Split it careful. The seeds were good, full, dark, viable. He held them out. These all right. She examined them, nodded. Perfect. They worked in silence. Morning sun came through the kitchen window, caught dust floating in the air. The smell of bread baking filled the room. Emily had started making 2 loaves a day now that they had flour money again. Coffee sat on the stove, staying warm, normal, domestic. The kind of morning Jacob had stopped believing possible. Frank came by yesterday, he said, while you were resting. What did he want? Asked if we'd teach his boys about rotation, paid work, says they need to learn before he gets too old to manage his place proper. Emily's hands stilled. She looked up. Paid work, $50, for teaching them through harvest season. Her eyes went wide. Jacob. I know. $50 plus the $400 from the spring calf sale Frank had paid good money. Better than promised, plus the mortgage payment made for the first time in 18 months. They weren't rich, but they weren't dying either. Emily stood, walked around the table, took his face in both hands, and kissed him. Long, thorough. When she pulled back, she was smiling. We did it, she said. You did it. We, together. She kissed him again. Quick this time. I'm making an extra cake for Sunday. Celebration. Where are you getting the sugar? Mrs. Perkins is trading for eggs again. I've got plenty of eggs now. She went back to the seed sorting. We've got plenty of everything. That afternoon, Jacob mended the north fence. Posts needed replacing the good kind of work, the kind that meant things were growing and thriving instead of just hanging on. Emily came out to help. She shouldn't have been lifting posts, but she did anyway. Stubborn as always. They worked in the heat. Sweat ran down Jacob's back. His hands calloused now, scarred from the hand watering. Toughened from 4 months of real work, gripped the post digger and drove it into soil that gave easier than it had in years. What are you thinking? Emily asked. He tamped dirt around a new post, tested it, solid. How different this is. From May, the land or you, both. He moved to the next hole. Dad used to say I had more pride than sense. Have. He drove the digger in, pulled up dirt that was dark and rich instead of gray. But you taught me the difference between pride and stubbornness. What's the difference? Pride knows when to bend. He set the post. She held it steady while he packed dirt around it. Stubbornness just breaks. A hawk circled overhead. The cattle grazed in pasture that had been dust 4 months ago. In the distance, Klaus's place showed green, too. He'd started composting after the gathering. Started letting fields rest. The Mendozas had dug new channels following the old acequia lines. Even Frank had sectioned off part of his land to try clover. The whole basin was changing, because Emily had shown them it was possible. Frank asked about teaching his boys, Jacob said again. Needed to say it out loud. Make it real. Asked me, like I know what I'm doing. You do know. I know what you taught me. That's different. Emily let go of the post, brushed dirt from her hands. You think I knew all this when I came here? I had books, diagrams, my father's journals, but I'd never put seed in actual ground and hoped it would grow. She looked at him. You taught me the doing part, the faith part, the part where you're scared but you do it anyway. His throat felt tight. He hammered the post. Didn't trust his voice. We saved each other, she said quietly. That's the truth of it. They finished the fence as the sun dropped toward the horizon, stood back and looked at their work. Straight lines, strong posts, good fence that would hold. Emily leaned against him. He put his arm around her shoulders. Her hand rested on her belly, protective. Gentle. The slight curve visible even through her dress. What if I'm a terrible father? The words came out before he could stop them. You won't be. How do you know? Because you were willing to fail, to look foolish, to learn. She turned in his arms, looked up at him. Those are the things that make good fathers. He kissed her forehead, held her careful. The baby between them small still, but real. Growing. Sunday morning came before dawn. Jacob woke with Emily still sleeping beside him. They'd stopped pretending about separate rooms 6 weeks ago. Her things had migrated to his room one piece at a time, her brush, her nightgown, her father's journals that she read in bed while he cleaned tack or mended harness. He slipped out without waking her, pulled on pants and boots, walked outside. The land waited in pre-dawn gray. Jacob walked the property like he used to, but everything was different now. The test acre was thick with growth. The north pasture showed clover and alfalfa mixed with native grasses coming back strong. The south section, planted 6 weeks ago, was ankle-deep in green. 32 head of cattle healthy. Their coats shining even in weak light. He knelt at the test acre, ran his hands through soil that was dark and rich and smelled alive. Remembered it gray and dead in his hands 4 months ago. Remembered thinking it was over. Remembered the letter he'd written to a stranger in Philadelphia because he had nothing left to lose. Footsteps behind him. Emily, hair loose down her back, one of his old shirts over her nightgown, hand on her belly where the curve was visible now. Unmistakable. Couldn't sleep, she asked. Wanted to see it. He stood, brushed dirt from his hands. Before everyone comes. Wanted to remember what it looked like when it was just us. She came to stand beside him, took his hand. They looked at green growing where gray had been, at cattle grazing where bone-thin animals had starved, at a ranch that breathed. I was thinking, Emily said, about your father. Jacob's chest tightened. Not about him being disappointed, about, she stopped. Started again. About him seeing this, what you built, What we built. I think he'd be proud. He'd say I should have listened sooner. Maybe. But he'd still be proud you listened at all. She squeezed his hand. Pride and disappointment can live in the same heart. I know, my father felt both about me. The sun touched the horizon, turned the sky pink and orange and gold. The land lit up green everywhere, rich and alive and breathing. Frank's bringing his boys today, Jacob said. To learn, says other families want to learn too. He paused. The words felt too big. Asked if we'd consider teaching regular, making it, he stopped, making it something we do. Emily turned to look at him. What did you say? Said I'd ask my wife. Her smile started small. Grew. Your wife says yes. They stood in the growing light, Jacob's hand on her belly now, feeling the curve where their child grew, her hand covering his. Both of them quiet. The cattle grazed. The clover grew. The soil held water. Fed roots, lived. In 3 hours, families would arrive. The barn was ready, coffee would be hot. Emily's celebration cake waited on the kitchen table, but right now, it was just them. Jacob Turner and Emily Turner, standing on land that had come back from the dead, on a ranch that breathed, with a child growing and a future that looked for the first time in years possible. You taught me land wasn't the only thing needing patience and right care, Jacob said. His voice came out rough. Taught me I was worth saving too. Emily rose on her toes, kissed him soft. We saved each other. The sun climbed. The land greened. The cattle grazed, and 2 figures stood hand in hand facing the sunrise, a man who'd learned to bend before he broke, and a woman who'd taught him that asking for help wasn't surrender. It was survival. It was partnership. It was love. The future stretched ahead, uncertain as any future was, full of risks and challenges and the 1,000 small failures that came with living. But they'd face it together. The land beneath their feet was proof of what partnership could build, what patience could grow, what faith, real faith, earned through sweat and blisters and hand-watering in drought, could accomplish. Jacob's hand tightened on Emily's. She leaned into him. The baby moved between them, small flutter. Barely there. First time he'd felt it. Did you feel that? She whispered. Yeah. They stood in the sunrise, on healing land, with their child quickening, with their community gathering, with their future unfurling green before them. And it was enough. There's something quiet that settles in after a story like this one. Not relief exactly, not resolution, just the familiar weight of recognizing ourselves in someone else's struggle, the kind we've carried alone for too long, thinking no one else would understand. Many of us know what it feels like to stand on failing ground, to watch something we've tended for years slowly die despite our best efforts, to finally, reluctantly, reach out when pride said we shouldn't need to. Some of us have been Jacob, too stubborn to see another way until someone showed us. Some of us have been Emily, arriving somewhere new with only our knowledge and hope that it might be enough. The truth is, we don't always know when healing begins. It sneaks in through small things, a handful of green shoots, a hand held in darkness, Someone believing in us before we believe in ourselves. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly takes root. These stories don't tie up neat. Real life doesn't either. And perhaps that's all right. Perhaps we're allowed to sit with the unresolved parts, the tender places, the things we're still learning at 65 or 70 or 80. Perhaps asking for help isn't the ending of our strength, but the beginning of something we couldn't build alone. Thank you for staying through this one, for listening all the way to the end.